Associate Vice President for Economic Development at UMass. I'm in the President's Office. We're a 5-campus system across the Commonwealth. So I work out of Boston, and previous to this I was the publisher and editor of Mass High Tech, which is a technology journal, a business journal for technology life sciences companies, and I have been there and the predecessor of the Boston Business Journal since 1998. So I've been in Boston working with businesses and technology companies for quite a while. I'm now helping the university to interact with business and government and entrepreneurship efforts across our system. So that's me. And what I would like to do now is just we'll introduce the panelists briefly, but I will let you know that if you are here to learn about what to be aware of when selling to K through 12, you are in the wrong world. So this is what to be aware of when selling to higher ed. And so hopefully you're all still here when I'm finished with that. And hopefully we might even get a few more people, but I'm glad to see the folks that we have. And we've got a great panel for you, and we're going to have a great discussion. So from, you have their name tags right there, but I'll just go down the line for those of you who can't see them. Your left to right, my right to left, just introducing Chris Hardigan, who's a VP and General Manager of Genzabar. We have Stephen Marcus, the founder and CEO of Matchbox. Oh, you guys swapped out meeting here. I had you alphabetical. Mike Pickett is the CIO of Brown University. And next to me is Carol Ballone, CEO of Educate Online. And rather than lengthy bios and introductions, I'm going to just ask them some questions in a row, and they will then talk to you a little bit about how they got to where they are in the context of the questions. So with that, we're going to start with Chris. And Chris, talk about how selling to higher ed differs from selling to other markets and industries. And in doing so, you can talk a little bit about your experience with Genzabar versus some of your other past sales and business development roles.
Sure, thank you. Thanks for having me. This is a great forum and a great event. Before I get started, besides Mike, are there any other institutions represented in the room? I want to make sure I don't talk ill of any of my friends.
So promise we won't share any of your secrets.
Okay.
Well, we know BU is here, so we've got Brown. And actually, that's a great question. Let me stop you right there. How many entrepreneurs in the room? Folks who are in or business and industry? Okay. How many business and industry people, not higher ed? How many higher ed folks? Okay. That's an interesting question. We'll have to suss that out a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I've been doing this for about 10 years, and at Genzabar we sell enterprise systems. I've been on sales teams that have sold some pretty large systems. So a lot of my experience stems from big ticket items, and one of the biggest challenges. And I came out of financial services before that, so I have a little bit more experience. My earlier days in more of a transactional environment. It's definitely much more of a consultative sale environment in higher education. One of the biggest challenges I've experienced is you're not always selling to a person, you're often selling to a committee, right? Certainly, especially with big ticket items. And one of the challenging things is, I feel in higher education is just by virtue of the way organizations are structured, it only takes one person on that committee to say no at any point in time, right? Somebody at the end of the day is going to say yes, but because the entire committee is made up of influencers, there's a ton of influencers in these decisions. Because the entire committee is made up of influencers, it only takes one person to say no, and oftentimes that one person on a committee of 10 or 12 can stop your deal dead in the tracks. So that's always been a big challenge of us, and when I work with our sales teams, I try to make sure that they understand that, and they have to be selling to an entire committee. You have to really take the time to understand the motivations, the emotions sometimes of everybody on that committee, because all it takes is one stop sign being held up at a committee meeting, from my experience, to stop your deal dead in the tracks. One of the things, one of the good things I like about selling into higher education, and again, I've been doing this for 10 years, so maybe I'm just totally guide and rule at this point in time. Your good customers, once a customer is satisfied and once you get in there, a good customer can be really pretty much your best salesperson, I believe. Not only are we talking about just references, right? You put your name, your logo on your website and you get a quote from them, maybe a white paper, maybe a press release. But I've got customers who will literally pick up the phone for me and make sales calls. We don't call it sales calls, right? We call it reference calls, or we call it adoption calls, or we call it, check-in calls or whatever. But they would literally pick up the phone and call a peer or a contact or a colleague at another institution who they don't know, and ask them if they have any questions about Genzabar, about the system that they're contemplating buying, and sometimes invite them to campus for a visit. And the power of that network and the power of that reference is incredibly valuable, I feel. And then lastly, I don't know too many other industries where the entire industry provides a directory of all the contacts, all the contact titles, and how to contact them and what their job responsibilities are for free to the public, right? So we get these directories every year. We're not selling M&Ms through convenience stores where we know generally how many were sold and where they were sold. We know exactly who is our potential buyer and who is our potential customer. We know their name, we know their contact information, we know their email address, and through our network we can find out a lot more about them. So when we talk about customer segmentation, we talk about segments of one. Right? We try to build a segment of one because we have the data, we have the information available to us. And shame on us if we don't use that appropriately. So you can get in really, really close with your prospects, with your customers in this industry. You can look them in the whites of the eye, you know exactly who they are when it comes time to make that decision. I don't know too many other industries where you can do that.
Great, thank you, Chris. Mike Pickett, as a CIO, the CIOs that I know are pretty much barraged daily by vendor calls. My question for you was, when we talked to you earlier, was whether you even answer your phone. But I guess what I would probably ask for the benefit of this group is, what do entrepreneurs and investors need to understand about your environment, higher ed IT, to be most effective in reaching you? And then you can answer whether or not you actually answer your phone as well.
Okay. So I think you really have a great perception into higher ed. We're very risk averse because it's like you said, a tie is considered 43-1. And everybody can point to things. Even the president's afraid of the faculty because you can't fire faculty. So it makes for an environment that can be highly charged and political, where decisions are very, very, very slow.
I didn't say that.
I'm sorry. I'm paraphrasing.
I didn't want to say that.
And so you have to be really careful how you approach this. Vendors don't talk to me unless they come in with a recommendation from a high-placed alumni, a president, vice president, somebody whose judgment I trust, or a colleague. And you are absolutely right. We are totally incestuous in talking to our peers. The research universities, CIO, it's not consortium, they use another word, collegiate, is a group that I depend on very highly, about 50 to 60 CIOs from top-end research universities around the country. And we talk all the time. Our lists buzz every day. And some people are nodding yes, they're part of those lists. And we are not shy at all about saying, so I'm getting this from somebody, what did you hear? And we compare notes and we go, that doesn't make sense, or that didn't work at my site and I'm switching over to this new vendor. So part of the deal for an entrepreneur is getting your foot in the door at one of these places. So there's a few groups like this around the country. Common Solution Group is a smaller, different group. Not all are ones, but most of them are. So a good bit of overlap, slightly different types of program, but very, very similar in terms of really active in consulting with each other. We all, not all of us, but the various parts of the country have university CIO consortiums, and I think they all work pretty much the same. So get in with one of those, and you probably will have a foothold, and you can start pecking away at it. But getting your foot in the door is the tough part. And I will answer ahead of time. No, I don't answer my phone. I seriously have not answered a vendor call for years. I seriously haven't. My assistant, Wendy, knows how to handle vendor calls. She gets them to the right director. They don't hit me because I don't, CIOs don't know anything. We'll make a mess of it. So we get it to the person who's actually has more information, who's more responsible for that direct piece of the business. Then we ask really tough questions. We're held responsible at the top of the organization for, is it technically astute, good, does it have a good life cycle, is the company stable enough? And by that, I think back to my early days when I put a big contract out to what we subsequently called the three guys in Jersey in a garage. And they didn't make it. Lots of them do. These guys didn't. And so Duke University Medical Center was stuck with some software running on a set of libraries that was no longer supported. So you learn things like this, and you take some bets, and some bets are good, some are not. Anyway, those are the kind of things that a CIO is responsible for in terms of influencing, if it's a big university. The governance also works that a dean, for example, the dean of the college is going to make the final call on, do we buy a piece of software that does student information systems, not the CIO. I may bring it to her as a possible solution. I may tell her what I know about the company and how viable it is, the technology, how stable, redundancy, backup, disaster recovery, all those things that we really, really care about. Her eyes roll when I talk about it. But she cares about how does it work for students? How does it work for teaching? So you got to find out a little bit about the organization, I think, to know who to talk to. And it may not be obvious. The CIO, if you can bring it up with them, can help you. But so can other people. And I think that's where you have to maybe even Google the word governance, IT governance, as you're poking around. Because as you mentioned, the names are all out there. You just have to start decoding it. I do get a little peeved when people assume that they can just talk to the CIO and I'll decode it for them. No, I got way too many things to decode all of that for everybody.
Great, thank you very much, Mike. Stephen, so we heard a little bit from Chris about selling from the perspective of a larger company. You're coming from a startup, so you're a lot smaller, so you have a different set of challenges when selling to higher ed. I'd love to hear about the sales cycle from your perspective, the barriers to entry, and then, of course, your experience in working in startups, and so how your experience has prepared you for this role. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah, thanks. I think you guys both hit the nail on the head, so little pieces of both of those stories that play into having a startup.
Please speak into the mic. They're taping. Get nice and close. There you go.
There are different pieces that play into here. Is that it is it's decision. The decisions are made by consensus. They're made by committees. Fortunately, we sell software to help them make decisions on committees, so it works out well. But at the end of the day, us learning about that sales cycle is completely unique. I've been in the enterprise space for 20 years. I've only sold B2B. We got into this market. It was unique. I'm not used to the consensus sell, so that was unusual. Finding the right people is really easy. Finding the budget is completely different. Yeah. Budgets are the most obfuscated thing in higher education. There are pieces of budgets that are pulled in at different times. People move, jockey things around. You have to be cognizant of the sales cycles of the college. The actual fiscal years, they vary. Almost every place has a little bit of a permutation of that. Getting your first customer is always the hardest thing. Getting your first set of customers, they are very siloed. You might think you have one university, but it really is exactly right. There's the decisions are made at the department level or the program level, and they all have their own sort of needs and business processes that they're trying to support. So, you could call up the CIO, but he would do the same thing he's saying, is that it would send you down to the business level and get them to validate the solution. So you have to find the right place on campus that business is being done. You have to have sold to somebody else in the same business. You call up and say, well, I have so-and-so university. They'll ask who? They'll ask which program has it, and they will call them. You'll be surprised on the same campus how people don't know each other across different businesses, but yet they know everybody else at the other schools. Like all the undergrads know each other. But if you ask somebody on the same campus, you're the undergrad dean who we sell to the enrollment, admissions office and faculty, but each admissions office might not know the other people at the other admissions offices, but they'll know everybody else in the other admissions offices at the other campuses that they compete with. Not even the people, it's like their chief competitor they're on the horn with every day. In any other business, you don't call your enemy, but this is a collegial business. You'll find that they know each other. The people who vie for the same candidates, they see each other at events, they talk to each other. Getting them on board, knowing that it is siloed, you have to have referenceable customers in each of those is important. Finding the budget's been hard. As a startup, you have to have some financial ability to survive some of what are these longer cycles. If you miss a window, you have to come back the next fiscal year. It's not even you have to wait 3 months. You have to wait until the whole thing ticks over again, and then you can have that conversation and pick up right where you left off. No offense against you if you miss that window. Not that they're not interested in your product. It's just that hold on until we come back around and talk to you. And they have very distinct cycles. they don't know the map on campus either. So you can call up and say, hey, how do I get to Joe, so-and-so? They're like, I don't know. Look it up. Call somebody else. So it's finding out that map. From a financial perspective, some of the bigger deals are harder to take down. You need a stronger balance sheet. You need strong investors that are willing to take phone calls. They care about it. Small deals are easy to pick off without having some financial heft behind you. Getting to know the procurement process. One thing that I knew before going into this is how to get through procurement. That is not for the faint of heart. Different procurement offices all have different hoops to run through. Security, checks, different vendor guidelines, and things you need to sign off on. Understanding how to navigate a contract and knowing how to vet the farm for indemnification and what happens if something goes wrong. I mean, I've been through those, but you can get buried pretty quickly, and you need to know how to navigate.
And speaking from someone from a large public research university, it can get even hairier if it's a public versus a private. And we're going to get into that. We're going to talk a little bit more about the differences between public and private, large and small. You mentioned R1. I think some folks in here might not know what R1 is, so we're going to talk a little bit about that. But before we do, I want to just make sure that we hear from Carol Malone, who has been in this business for a while. And so WebCT, there may be some people who don't know WebCT. So you started that in 1999. How does what you're doing now compare with the industry, the ed tech space 20 years ago? And then we'll talk a little bit, then what we can do is move what you're doing now, and we'll talk a little bit. So I'm going to start with you, and we're going to go back this way after that.
Okay, great. So have any of you experienced WebCT, either as an institute? Okay, good. So I hope all of you would then put your hands back up and say you had a great experience with WebCT. Thanks. So as you know, we were one of the first with Blackboard to develop e-learning for higher education, and at that point in time, there were no e-learning applications in education, which seems strange to think of that, because when you look at the adoption today, it's pervasive. But we were out as pioneers developing a concept around interactions between faculty and students to impact the learning experience. So when I was asked about what was the market like then versus what's it like now, we had to educate the market in the concept of e-learning. What is it? Why do you need it? Why would you want it? What issues would it help you address? And then we had to develop a technology that would serve those needs, and then we had to sell that and broadly distribute that. So at the time, the issue was that campuses had network infrastructure, but there were no applications for faculty and students. So set out to develop a business model where we would inexpensively license the technology, and our revenue was around a .com model. So our biggest investor was CMGI. Do people remember CMGI?
Sure.
Yeah. So they started off with us. So we were going to be a .com and use a commerce model and eyeballs to get our revenue stream. So average $1,900 per license for the application. And so we set out in the marketplace, and we built up millions and millions of students using the application. And then the whole .com crash occurred. And then interestingly enough for us, which was very valuable, was that the application started to get some traction. I did want to back up a minute. When the company was first started and we had this concept of e-learning, we went out to get people that were thought leaders in education to say, this is going to be an unbelievable application. And one of the quotes I remember using was from John Chambers, Cisco. It was my opening, anybody that was in investment banking, it was my opening quote on my pitch, which was, education over the internet is going to be so big, it's going to make email usage look like a rounding error. So people like him, and then thought leaders within educational institutions, it would have been people like Mike at the time that would say that, yes, this is an application that we are going to use. So sort of when you're very early on, that was really important to us. Although I have to say, the grounds on which we sit today, when I came and spoke to MIT, they said faculty and students will never do this. So just a little inside scoop. So Harvard said the same thing, actually. I couldn't get the Ivies to admit that anybody would do this. So it set out, we developed the application, inexpensively licensing the application. Lots of students are using the application. And we did it from the bottom up, which if you're doing a consumer-based model, that's great. But we have a hell of a time then when we built out an enterprise application and brought the price points way up, because then we were trying to go top down in the institution and Fortunately for us, as the dot-com market crashed, our customers wanted more and more functionality, so we were able to build out an application that added value and was able to be priced at a much higher level. So we ended up 100,000+ per year on a license model, plus services on top of that, which is a real business. But sort of that transition was really difficult when we started from the bottom up. So again, we had sort of faculty and students dabbling. Students really pulled the market, faculty pulled the market. We had a lot of publishers who were partners of ours, and the only way we got the publishers into the marketplace was to have the institutions themselves say, I want your content in this application because I'm using it. So we had to pull it through the market that way. And from the value proposition standpoint, we really had to then, and we still do now, talk about ROI when you're selling strategically to an institution. Think in terms of revenue, cost, and quality. And so the top-down model is really around, can I influence your revenue stream? Can I impact your cost structures? And can I impact your quality? And quality takes the form often in academic outcomes around pass rates, retention rates. Think about all the accrediting issues that the institution is dealing with. But to me, probably one of the biggest jewels in education is that many institutions are thinking about the institution as the business of education, and a revenue, cost, and quality issue is really what's going to get the attention in the president and the C-suite. So what I'm doing today is Educate Online. And it's a Sterling Partners backed company. The organization you probably know, Sylvan Learning, Laureate, Walden University. I'm in that sort of portfolio. And we do live online instruction. We specifically focus on gateway skills for career and college readiness. It's math, reading, and writing. Interesting difference now. So 2/3 of 4th graders and 2/3 of 8th graders are below proficiencies in math and reading on nationals tests, right? You get to college, 60+% of students are below college ready level in math and reading. Pathetic numbers. So millions and millions of dollars are spent at the post-secondary level today around remediation, and it is deemed incredibly ineffective because you get high dropout rates. So strategically different than it was before. With WebCT, we had to educate the market in the need for e-learning and that there's pain around that and dollars should be allocated to that. This business, there's the CUNY system, $72 million on remediation. You go into the Florida system, $160+ million on remediation. The dollars are being spent. Our challenge is having them spend it on what we do. So when I took over the company, I just took it over last year, it was a tutoring company. Well, who's going to spend millions of dollars on tutoring? No, what we do is we impact academic outcomes. And we've demonstrated outcomes to improve pass rates, retention rates, and graduation rates for post-secondary students. And we've actually developed an ROI calculator. We did this for WebCT too, by the way. I have found that to be incredibly powerful when you're dealing with senior level executives. The ROI calculator, which shows this is the way you do business today, and calculate that. Build out the model with the institution. This is how we can impact your financial models and your academic outcomes in a different business model. And then they then see the numbers and they see the academic benefits in their terminology. So that is consistent from then until now as a powerful tool that we've used in both environments. So today it's about reallocating dollars in terms of the business that we provide. And when you're thinking about starting and getting into education, often it is a case of they spend dollars doing something similar to what your service is, and you've got to figure out how to allocate those dollars over to what you do. We're in a services business now. We are building out the technology to where we can license the technology. My inclination is when you think about services, it's sort of, it could be one-off, you could be thrown out. I really like the technology anchor in an institution, so you've got the annuity base built out. And as everybody knows, those that know WebCT, we were in the marketplace with Blackboard constantly, and people could not take, we couldn't take them out, and they couldn't take us out, because once you implemented technology, UMass was one of our big partners, you can't take it out easily. It becomes embedded in instructional practices. So think about that in terms of how to embed in the instructional practices. And at WebCT, we did that. Right now with Educate Online, because we're a service, we could be thrown out more easily, but we are building out our technology to similarly move into that kind of a space to penetrate and hold the market share. So I will pause on that for.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Any reactions, Stephen? I saw you nodding a little bit. Do you have any reactions to that? I'm not going to put you on the spot.
Yeah,
I have more questions. But
it's funny because
speaking of
we had to learn a lot of that. Exactly what you just said, like building an ROI case. We have 15 customers to sign up in a year, and we have 600 in a pipeline.
Right.
And your first batch of customers, might not really care about building ROI. They're already fluent. They're early adopters. They're already fluent
Right.
on how to build those cases and show the school. I guess I have a difference, maybe it's my own fault, is that I have a difference in building great product. Like I think there's a lot of products sort of wedged in the market, and they really are kind of anchored into it. Exactly as you said, somebody's figured out the philosophy that this is a slower moving market, and they can capitalize on it. It's a great market because if you're a capitalist, it's a wonderful place to wedge yourself, and you can get paid for a very long time. I've seen a lot of really crap products. It's sad, but I see a lot of junk. And I think it's unfortunate. A lot of people come to us because they're begging for new product. They're literally, please bring us new product. And they're resorting to crazy things. They're spending even more money on custom product or stuff that's just not meant for this market. And so I like the idea of making the market more transactional, and that you can get new product. If you're a new entrant, you make a better product. If you can make a better product than us, please do. Like, I welcome it. I welcome competition to the market. It'll make better product for everybody. There's plenty of money in this market. It's the biggest gripe is how slow it takes to switch something out.
Thank you, that's great. The title of this is What to Be Aware of When Selling to Higher Ed. I think it is critical that we define what we mean by higher ed. So now I'm going to come back to my original point, which is, what are we even talking about when it comes to higher ed? I mean, not only does it differ, as we know, from K through 12, which is, again, downstairs, not only is it different from government, which has its own procurement system, but when we talk about higher ed, where do you see your sweet spot? I mean, are we talking public research universities, small state colleges, large private universities, small private colleges? Where, well, we'll go right down the line. We can start back with Chris again. Sure. Where do you find it, your sweet spot? Where's the most opportunity for folks in the room? I'm not sure we even want to get into MOOCs and online programs, but we could. For-profit universities exist now. So, I mean, blue sky question, but what do we talk about when we talk about higher ed?
Yeah, it's very important to accent the fact that a college is not a college, is not a college, is not a college. There's 4,000 or so accredited institutions out there, probably double that when you look at non-accredited. Within each one, there's departments, sometimes there's separate colleges that operate independently. And you can't take, we call them power maps, right? You can't take the map of where the decisions and how the decisions are made on any one college and put that on top of any other type of institution. And because of that, it just makes the sales job a lot harder. We really focus on not the Browns of the world, not the Dukes of the world either, not the UMasses of the world. My company really focuses on 10,000 students and under. When you look at the distribution of colleges and universities in the country, I think it's 60-some-odd% are actually under 5,000 students. There's a lot of small institutions out there. We serve a lot of rural community colleges, a lot of technical colleges, tribal schools, a lot of faith-based liberal arts type institutions. We have some state schools, four-year state publics, large community college systems, et cetera, and some very large and prominent Ivies and others. Just on UPenn. But we really focus on that 10,000 student and under market because I feel, we feel that our solutions can be much stickier. We talked about stickiness. We've got clients who've been running our stuff for 42 years. We still have a couple open VMS ERP systems out there in the industry. We do. We've got 62 customers running open VMS still. Us back in the 60s. They started with scratch, right? So because they can put their coffee cup on it in the morning and they can forget about it. And it just runs and runs and runs and runs and they can do everything else. They don't have big IT operations. A lot of times the CIO that I'm working with is running cable and putting, and booting servers. Right? I mean, they're actually hands-on, answering help desk calls for their students and things like that. So if you can, from my perspective, if you're talking technology in an institution, and you can get into that sort of mass market, that sort of smaller schools who many of them will be here forever and ever and ever, and you can provide a solution to them that allows them to sort of free up time, increase revenues, of course, decrease costs, but free up time and become more efficient. You can really get in there and you can stay there for a long, long time. When we model out new customer acquisitions and we look at pricing scenarios, et cetera, we model 20 years, 20-year relationship. That's the assumption that we make on the numbers. And if you can do your job right, you can get that easily.
So I'm going to head down slightly a different path simply because I'm the only university student on this committee. and think mostly, I'm aiming towards the entrepreneurial, smaller startup types of people. My dad was an inventor. He started up 2 companies, had 43 patents. So I kind of been around those guys. One of the things that, if I were you, I would be thinking about is this power of free. You know, we all know how that's disrupting everything. Brown, in the last 3 years, has adopted Google Apps for Education across the board, faculty, staff, students, with well over 90% either extremely satisfied or satisfied. So that's free. Hard to compete with that. I sold that one actually as a cost avoidance because we actually had to spend some money in terms of Google support and training and continue to do that. So as a marketing approach, you might even think not about ROI, but cost avoidance. And so sometimes that's a real push. It's difficult to actually calculate how much Google Apps for Ed is worth because of the variety of things that comes with it. We adopted Workday, which is our ERP system in the cloud, put it in last July for human capital management and benefits and payroll and such, and we'll go live on financials this July, replacing 25-year-old mainframe-based systems. And we are on our very last term, coming off of WebCT, Blackboard, onto Canvas, which is also a cloud-based system. So one of the things I'm seeing, Brown is very early on this curve in the college and university realm in terms of adoption of these types of systems. But that was because we were so far behind, right? We had to jump and the opportunities have to present themselves. But I think there's going to be a lot of this jumping. And one of the things that comes with this is this issue of, as new entrepreneurs are coming in, as you're moving into new market space that really there's not a lot of people in there, you're new and the university is still not quite sure about what it's needing. And it really makes for a good conversation where if you can bring something to the table, fess up and say, you know, we actually could use you. We value you. You may be a community college, you may be an Ivy League, who knows what you are. But if we could get you just to pilot this in a department and give us feedback on how it works, help us tune our functionality. If it makes sense, and it makes sense for everybody, suddenly our product gets a ton better and you get a cost advantage. And whenever you say cost advantage, even CIOs start answering phone calls. Actually, you're absolutely correct. Most CIOs don't do what I do in terms of how many people in the budgets and things like that. Most of them are they do real work. And those are people that you really can convince if you can show them. And part of showing them is perhaps giving them something for free or a pretty good discount on the first time in. But in exchange, one of the things that a CIO wants is some assurance that, you know, if I work with you, if I put my business staff with you and my technical staff with you, and we end up changing what you normally do so that it works well here, would you buy the fact that this would be built into base code, and be supported? Because I'm not a software development house. I can't afford to have a dedicated programmer to fix this when it breaks. And so that's something that you can sell that I've seen a lot of CIOs, mine included, eyes light up over. I like that kind of relationship. Talk about a sticky relationship. That's a great one. A few other, I'll just run through a couple of things really quickly. The whole thing about being straight up front with what you need, what you want, what you can bring, and then listen really, really, really well, including asking who is leading, if it's academic tech, who's leading academic tech? Like you said, it's going to be different at every school. So, and there's 2 people at Brown. Device independence is a huge, huge thing. So if you can weave that into your conversation, do it, please. Other open things that you may or may not have anticipated, but are really, really important, is this common infrastructure idea, common authorization and authentication. And some of the shibboleth is a key word in this, or in common. If your products don't yet support this, it's probably a good idea to say to somebody, hey, could you spend half a week and call up, look up the In Common Foundation, look up Shibboleth, and try to get a hold of some people. And we want to be able to support this because somebody's going to do it. And it's a fairly standard higher ed capability. It's one the U.S. government is interested in too. So this is something that may give you some power. It's kind of like common plumbing.
Thank you, Mike.
Yep.
We're closing in on 10 minutes left, and I want to make sure that we have time for questions. So while you think about questions for the next minute to 2 minutes, I'm going to let Stephen get a crack at this question, and Carol, but you get about a minute each. So, yeah.
The same question.
Yeah, I mean, the idea is, where are you selling to big universities, small colleges, privates, rural?
Well, I mean, there's an adage in the, like, I heard this from a friend of mine who's from the HR enterprise software business, but HR specifically, is that, you want to position your organization to sell to certain kinds of customers. Chris says, Salesforce did really well selling to the middle market, and it's still largely a middle market company, is that you should position your company for whatever kind of opportunity you want to go after. You want to position yourself for the bigs, you want to go after the Browns of the world, you have to have an org that's ready to support an organization that big. It's just the way it is. They look materially different than Chris's because they require different support structures. You can't do both. Salesforce, like I said, incredibly successful business, sells primarily to mid-sized companies. That's just their play. Really hard to change mid-flight to something else, and it's really hard to try to support all of them. You can't make all the products, can't make them all for everybody, you can't make everybody happy, but they do require support. I will say one more thing about open source software. Super fascinating, great way to get in. The true cost of owning software is still the cost of owning software. It's just the upfront is a lot lower. This market loves open source software, but you have to be very fluent in open source. So if you do that route,
Open standards.
or open standards or open source,
Open standards.
open standards.
Thank you, Stephen. And Carol, you get the last word on that topic.
Yeah, I would just add there's clear segmentation in post-secondary. So if you've got community colleges, you've got research universities, you've got state schools, you've got small privates. So when you're positioning in the marketplace, nobody cares outside of their tier or their peer group what the other peer group is doing. So that's when you think about post-secondary, think about in terms of market segmentations that have specific and unique issues and identifying your issues mapped to their strategic objectives within those key tiers and sell the peer groups that way.
Thank you. That's excellent. Chris mentioned that segmentation word earlier when we were talking about the segmentation of one. So, all right, let's go with some questions. You had your hand up first. Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to wait and ask this one. So my company licenses a learning management system for healthcare education. So think Blackboard for medical schools. We spun out of Duke. So we started with a very unique position, which was that we could walk out and use that brand pedigree. And we have only been in business a year, and we have 12 schools already, ranging from Yale to Temple to Toledo. So, but we've been challenged by, we have a very highly targeted market. We go straight to the senior associate deans for medical education. But we've thought maybe it's optimal to have conversations at different levels. So we've wondered if we should still, reach out to the CIO or the senior VP of finance or something to just kind of layer on that other relationship and build an advocacy. And also to Carol's point, how do you get to those numbers to do the ROI? Because the budget, like you were saying, is just impossible to find, and trying to figure out what software, enterprise software systems should be licensed for, and then how much money do they really have, and how do you find it? They say they don't have money. Well, the money's there. It's just not being spent efficiently, and we want to have them spend it on us. But to try to get our hands around those numbers has been very, very challenging.
Great couple of questions in there. So does she layer on and get advocacy at a different layer of the sales,
Carol,
the sales target, or do you want to talk about the ROI and finding the budget? Take it.
All right. So, all right. You take the first one. I'll take the second.
I can only give you a little bit of perspective selling to med schools.
Speaking of the mic, Chris.
Sorry, a little bit of perspective selling to med schools and nursing schools. If they're associated with a hospital, go to the hospital. Hospitals got the money, and they often fund the colleges themselves. So we've spent a lot of time banging our heads against the walls in med schools for them willing to tell us the hospital's not going to fund this project. So the hospital first. But that's besides that. That's the only.
That's good. I didn't know that.
That's the only little tip I can give you.
So I was at Duke Med for 12 years. And,
We weren't part of that problem you talked about.
Sure. And I totally agree with that. You do need to talk to the CIO and the business folks, because especially in the hospital, they will help you. They'll help you figure that out. It is very different. The cycles really do vary all over the place. One of the strategies I would suggest to you in terms of the contract process is to say, look, we won't know this information. We can't come up with what the ROI is going to be, but what we do is a blueprint process. Just like you'd hire an architect to come in to lay out a new building, that's what we'll do. Only we'll build it around our product. We'll do the fit gap, and we'll tell you, oh, this is what we could do to really spiff up your business process. It would save you this much money. That's the way you entrench yourself. And then guess what? After you do your blueprint, they say, could you do this for us?
Carol?
So in terms of the ROI calculator, it's funny because just went through this whole drill with Educate Online, having taken the company over. So it's a very much iterative process. So sitting down with senior people in institutions and saying, let's talk about how you do business, the way you do business today, and the cost structure that's associated with that, and the outcomes or the benefits you get as a result of the way you're doing business today. So instead of being conceptual, you're providing developmental education today. What does it cost you for developmental educational faculty? What does it cost you for your classroom structures? What does it cost you to recruit students? What does it cost you to replace students? So thinking about all the points along the chain of you're recruiting a student in, you're paying for instruction for that student, you're losing a certain amount of students, you're losing back-end revenue, you have more costs because you're duplicating costs because you have to now bring in another student. So think about the value chain and the pricing and the revenue associated with the way they do business today, and then how you would layer and replace that and make that better for them to produce better outcomes. But I found that I did this myself, just went out, right? Because it's a great conversation to have to senior executives, and we're all talking about the fact that in post-secondary, people are academics. They want to learn together, they want to build industries together, and WebCT was built by the customers, not by us. So I found that, and I find that, executives are very willing to talk to you, and when you sort of push and pull on models, the way we did it was I came up with a concept based on conversation, and then I literally just put it in front of people and said, react, let's put your numbers in, how does this work for you? And now it's refined to the point where we got it. So I made it very iterative, started with conversation to ask questions about the way you do business today, the way you conceptualize your business, and came up with outcomes that are measurable, it has to be measurable, and then tested the model with people. So
Great, thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
I was wondering if revenue share is changing how you're pricing, or like that ROI calculator.
Yeah.
Is revenue share, there's talk at least now, do you think that's going to replace the typical pricing structures that you were looking at with your ROI calculators?
I think revenue share is part of it, right?
Okay.
So that's just another component in terms of the value that you could bring to generate revenue, right? So you can add value in the revenue part of it. So
I guess I was thinking back to what Mike was saying, offering it for free in partnership with this revenue share model down the road. As the revenue increases, there's an agreed upon shared benefit.
or a shared risk model,
Yeah,
right?
okay,
So revenue share is one thing, but it's also shared risk based on success.
Right.
That's a hot topic right now too.
Right.
If I'm successful, you're successful, I'll give you more. Institution will give you more if we're both successful. So you take some risk at the front end with them.
We found revenue share is tough to get, I find, unless you can prove that you can bring revenue. So you can deliver
Incremental revenue.
how much revenue do you want, right? That's the sales.
So the one thing I want that we have found is if the price is lower, they're willing to share more on the upside, right? So that's the other side.
Sure,
of that.
absolutely.
Yeah. So.
Great. Next question. Yep.
I have a question for the vendors on the panel. It's been a huge shift from license cost models to subscription cost models.
Right. Yep.
And I'm curious if, in your experience selling a subscription cost model, you're solving a problem that's typically inefficient in today's sort of academic environment, but it's hard to justify the same amount of cost that a licensed business selling license used to charge for your service, as opposed to your monthly or annual subscription pricing. So how do you get the same amount of money that the licensed vendors used to get? If you're selling a subscription model, you're solving this problem, you're doing it more efficiently is your proposal. But oftentimes you aren't able to get the same amount of money that the licensed 5-year contract with the licensed vendor can.
So this is a good question. Licensing model versus the software, what is on demand or software as a service, right? The second part of that question is, you sell one to the CIO or the C-level, you sell the other one to the user, right? Because now Mike's can't implement anything because the faculty member's doing it on their own. So I might just add that extra layer to it, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, Carol and Stephen.
Yeah,
And Chris.
So one of the things that's interesting about that is careful on the subscription model in terms of demotivating buying behavior. So when in the early days of WebCT, when we just few in the institution were using it, it worked, but you reach a point where they need to know, Mike needs to know, what's my budget going to be, right? And so if it's a model that's a pay-as-you-drink model, it can sometimes be demotivating because you're repressing, you're suppressing the demand. And so you want to open it up. So one of the things you can consider that we did successfully there in the WebCT days was we tiered it, right? So, FTE from 0 to 5,000, 5 to 10,000, 10,000 plus. You can think about what those tiers could be, because you just don't want to disincent usage. That's my biggest concern on subscription models. And you also, from where Mike sits, and you should comment on it, typically they want to know what their budget's going to be.
Absolutely.
So
you can have a combination of that, tiered subscriptions based on that.
Yeah.
Stephen, you have something to add?
Yeah, I would just say that's the hardest thing in this market is pricing correctly. If you look at any of the other vendors, you look at price sheets from Oracle, look at, I'm looking at Jen's bars, but you look at